Greetings, everyone. This is the Cosmic Consciousness Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Sage. Today, I have the pleasure to have someone I met through our Institute of Noetic Sciences community group meetings. I think Cindy's been with us now for over a year, and
Yeah.
her background is so interesting that and in fact, you may have remembered her also because we did a group podcast with our Noetic Science group, I think, several months ago. So anybody that's tuning in may be remembering Cindy from that. But let me read you a little background on Cindy. And then I'm sure we will need to define a couple of the terms that are in this, and that'll be part of our exploration anyway. So, Professor Cindy Orser, Dr. Cindy Orser, was an innovator, principal investigator, and entrepreneur in academics and industry. Most recently, she served as the chief science officer for several startups, including 2 analytical cannabis testing labs, where she created and oversaw state-of-the-art cannabis testing facilities. Her contribution to the cannabis industry was early promotion of pesticide residue monitoring, the importance of terpenes in potency analyses, cannabis strain authentication through combining chemoprofile data analytics, with strain genotyping in the global cannabis market, creating True Hemp ID. True Hemp, I think, is must be a copyright. A simple molecular assay to distinguish fiber hemp from CBD resin hemp and THC drug-type cannabis, and formulating terpene-based products for anti-inflammatory relief. Professor Cindy Orser has her PhD from University of California, Berkeley, where she discovered the molecular basis of bacterial ice nucleation to be a single genic trait responsible for widespread frost injury on agronomic crops. So I'm guessing you grew up in Montana, right?
Yes.
So some of this had to have come just from the environment. You've got an interest in agriculture, plants, growing, all of that. And so um, tell me about
Yeah.
that a little bit, and then how that led into this whole
Oh,
background of. Oh, actually, first we should probably define a couple of terms.
okay.
Terpenes are like the aroma or
Right.
something from a
Right
plant,
there.
rose, or even, and of course, cannabis has its very distinct terpene.
Yes. Yes.
What other terms should we? Chemoprofile. It was just basically chemical profile, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Like the components. I mean, in this case, it's the chemical profile of the potency components. So that's both the cannabinoids and the terpenes. And ideally, it would also include some of the flavonoids. I mean, cannabis plant is amazing. It produces more terpenes than any other plant. I mean, not every strain produces all of them, but it produces, a couple hundred terpenes. And so terpenes are widespread. It's like you cut a lemon open, that's
Mhm.
limonene, or lavender or basil. I mean, they all have terpenes, all plants. And for a long time, people thought it was just, oh, that smells so nice. But actually, terpenes are physiologically active in the human body, which means we have receptors for them. And so then it progressed that, oh, we have receptors in our nose so we can enjoy the scent. But in animal studies, if you cut a lemon open and put it under a rabbit's nose, then you can take a blood sample and you can actually measure the limonene in the blood. So the terpenes are circulating and there are receptors throughout the body. I mean, for example, limonene has anti-cancer properties. It's been shown for prostate cancer. And a lot of the terpenes have antimicrobial activity as well as anti-inflammatory. So
Yeah.
it's another wonder drug from nature.
So the discovery you made at Berkeley, talk about
Okay.
that a little bit, and then we'll kind of backtrack to, okay, how did
Okay.
you get into this whole mess to
Okay.
begin with?
Well, actually it's a very interesting story, and even to this day, I'm shocked that more people don't know about the real cause of frost injury on agronomic crops. So that's all the frost-sensitive crops, and also the flowers of fruit trees are also susceptible to frost injury. Like, a couple years ago, our apple trees, the blossoms came out and we had a frost, and then there's no fruit. So the dogma was that, oh, it's the temperature, right? And even meteorologists on the nightly news will say, oh, it's going to be freezing when it's going to be 32 degrees. And so the truth is, the phase transition from liquid to solid, so from liquid water to solid ice, occurs at a much colder temperature. In fact, pure water doesn't freeze till minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit. But yet we
Mm.
all know, and particularly if you're a grower of a high cash crop like strawberries or almonds or grapes, you know that the critical temperature is actually 29 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 1.4 degrees Celsius, which is when your crops will freeze. But it's not because it's 29 degrees, it's because of the presence of bacteria. And I know this is so bizarre. Bacteria, they're epiphytes, meaning they live on the surface of plants, leaves, and they're widespread. They're on all plants except for the pine needles. So these bacteria are, the most predominant one is Pseudomonas syringae. There's also Pseudomonas fluorescens and Erwinia erbicola. Erwinia tends to be more prevalent on the flowers of fruit trees, but it's the bacteria. So I heard about this when I was an undergraduate at Montana State, and I thought, this is the most strange thing I have ever heard of. And I contacted the young assistant professor who had just started at Berkeley, because they had done some of the fundamental early studies at the University of Wisconsin, where he had got his PhD, showing that if you sterilize the seeds, corn kernels, and grew them in a controlled environment in a growth chamber, that the plants wouldn't freeze until 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So by removing the bacteria, you were gaining like 10 degrees of protection. And so I said, hey, I want to come to Berkeley and figure out how these bacteria are able to do this. And so I went there, and this was at the beginning of genetic engineering or cloning. So basically, I cloned the ice nucleation gene. I mean, it was just so crazy that, because when you clone, you make a library of all the DNA of Pseudomonas syringae and you put it into E. coli. And then we had this method where we could grow the bacterial colonies and replicate them onto a piece of foil that had been treated with xylene and paraffin and float it on a -5 degrees centigrade alcohol bath, basically, and show whether or not they had the ice gene. And so it turned out that it's a single genic trait, so one gene in these bacteria that encodes this very large protein that resides on the surface of the bacteria. And we modeled the protein, and turns out it's hexameric. So it just repeats over and over, and it forms a hexameric structure, and ice is hexameric. So this protein just physically lowers the activation energy required for liquid water molecules to take on the lattice structure of ice. So that was a really big deal to show that. And my idea was always for frost control. So I knocked out the ice gene and made the ice minus bacteria, which then, at the time, because this was, the early 80s, uh, that was considered a genetically modified organism, a GMO. And in those early days, instead of being placed under the USDA, which has always been pretty progressive, we were placed under the oversight of the EPA. And so it was labeled a pesticide. And so we had to write an environmental impact statement. So it was the first application to release a recombinant organism into the environment. We had to go out and do town halls to educate the public about what we plan to do. And by the time approval was granted to do a small field trial on potatoes, I had already left and I was on to my postdoc at Purdue. But indeed it worked. But and maybe you know the name Jeremy Rifkin, who is a dyed-in-the-wool environmentalist, and he said to my face that ice minus will never become a product. He said, "Over my dead body." And that's because we don't really know, right? We would like to prescribe to these bacteria why they have this unique trait. Why do these bacteria, these few species, have this ability to catalyze the phase transition from liquid to solid? Uh, but so somebody rented a small plane and flew around at 5,000 feet with petri dishes out the window and showed that you could collect this Pseudomonas syringae in the atmosphere. So these bacteria perhaps use this trait as a way to move around because they can get up in the vapor, the water vapor in the clouds. And then if when the temperature drops, then they can drop out of the atmosphere and back to ground and onto another leaf surface. Nobody did a detailed enough study because it would have required using a marked bacteria, a bacteria that had been modified, right? So it would have been another GMO experiment. So the irony here is that if I had done that work today using CRISPR technology, if you use CRISPR, it's not considered a GMO. So that would indeed have become then a tool that growers could use to reduce the threat of frost injury on their crop by spraying with the modified bacteria to outcompete the wild type. And we showed that in controlled greenhouse studies that, in fact, the ice minus the ice minus could compete with the wild type. So that's kind of the oh, I had
So
something in my
is
throat.
the discovery that you made just kind of on the shelf It's not being utilized, whatever, with
No, it's
agriculture.
not. It was not utilized, and, it was, my first patent, um, but there's 2, epilogues to this story. One of them is that in North America, almost all the ski areas make snow, and so you can't just spray water out of a nozzle and think that it's all going to nucleate into ice. So they use the wild type bacteria because it is the warmest biogenic, it's the warmest nuclei except for ice itself. So ice is the most efficient. If you have a tube of super cold water and you drop in a piece of ice, it will immediately nucleate. But these bacteria are the second most efficient ice nucleating agents. Most people don't know that. The other thing is the bacteria is fluorescent. So if you take a black light on a ski slope, um, I think in these days they use dead bacteria because it's a physical process. The bacteria don't have to be alive. Anyway, that you'll see fluorescence um, in the snow. The other part of this story, which I kind of didn't set it up adequately, is there are also frost tolerant plants, right? All the woody trees and bushes, they survive winters when it gets much lower than 29 degrees. And the way frost hardy plants or frost tolerant plants survive those cold temperatures is in the hardening process that we're in right now. In fall, plants partition the water out of their cells into the intercellular space. And so that essentially is pure water. And so plants then can survive to minus 38, which gets us to tree line. And again, tree line, everyone thought, oh, it's the elevation and it's the oxygen tension, gas tension. But it's not. It's tree line is defined by the minimum isotherm, which is minus 38 degrees, because that's when pure water freezes. So after I did my PhD at Berkeley, a guy at Colorado State went around and collected samples at tree line and made this finding. Anyway, so that
Wow,
was my PhD.
wow, that's actually pretty. I'm going to have to share this with my wife, who's a master gardener. Yeah, it's unfortunate that these kind of things just get sidelined,
Yes.
and for political reasons, often, not for legitimate advancement of better agriculture or
Right. Well, I mean, it could be that, if it had become a product, I mean, it was going to be $1 billion a year product back in the 80s. And I mean, we were contacted by, uh, citrus growers all over the world. And I went on a tour, speaking tour, talking about it because there was so much interest. So we don't know what the consequence might have been if it was widely applied. And could it have changed, the distribution of the wild type Ice Plus? And is the Ice Plus bacteria performing some other function we don't know about?
yeah.
Don't know.
Is
We
it
also don't
possible
know
they
where.
could be resurrected?
Yes, in fact, I was just at my major professor's retirement party this summer at Berkeley, and brought it up with him whether or not he had any interest in redoing it using CRISPR technology. I mean, in many ways, I'm kind of surprised nobody has done it.
Mhm.
I don't have a lab now, so It would be hard for me to do. I would have to partner with someone.
Yeah. So, did you have, I mean, growing up in Montana, well, in fact, what part of Montana were you raised in?
The Billings area.
Mhm. Did you, and I would suspect, because that's a semi-rural agricultural sort of region, area, state, that you had sort of a natural interest in this sort of thing, or what was it? I mean, was it only when you got to college at Montana State that you got interested in this sort of thing, or you had a kind of a predilection for science from an early age, or
Yeah.
how did that arise?
Yeah, I mean, even before I knew what it was, I always was curious. Curious about everything, and, um, I think it was probably in junior high that I realized that, yeah, I was gonna be a scientist. Yes, because, I mean, I consider it to have been a privilege to be a scientist, to have the freedom to ask questions and design experiments and get data and try and answer them, just not for fame and fortune, just to have the knowledge. So,
There's an
yeah,
interesting dynamic because I come from the social science or even humanities side of things. And right now, we know culturally there is a lot of energy that is trying to eliminate certain aspects of social science, um, humanities, looking at things differently, or even asking questions. In the
right,
hard sciences, that's a virtue to be able to ask questions and challenge and, really push the limits. But
right,
more recently, and in fact, I would say there's probably a rich tradition of in the social sciences and in humanities of narrowing things rather than expanding things. Um, did you experience any of that? And obviously, even in science, you're talking about this being kind of put on the shelf because it didn't go through the USDA, it went through the EPA. There is that politics that still comes into play. And, I mean, gosh, in the bigger scheme of things, the whole debate about creationism and evolution, and, I mean, go back
right,
to the Scopes trial and,
right,
um, you know,
right.
Darwin, all of that. But okay, so it's not a clear cut you know, virtue in science is to be able to challenge and ask questions and be in being encouraged to do so, where sometimes in the humanities, social sciences, that's not the case.
No, I think the same thing has happened in science because, in science, you need money. You need funding, right? You can have great ideas and I want to do this and that, but if you can't get the money through grants or contracts or endowments or something, because it's expensive to carry out science, and because of that, uh, there's this hierarchy of the people who sit on the panels that review grants at the NIH or the USDA or NSF or anywhere, any of the federal funding agencies or even the independent private philanthropic agencies, right? That are so biased because they already in their mind have an idea of what it is that are what's the priorities for whatever area. Um, so that definitely narrows and it even applies to this field of consciousness, because a lot of well-established scientists in their fields, usually physicists who have at some point in their career started to question the fact that the physical laws only apply to this tiny bit of the universe, us here on Earth, us in our little 0.01% or less, 0.001%. They don't apply to the vastness of the universe. And so they start to question and ask questions and pursue non-traditional approaches to investigating consciousness and asking these questions. And those individuals have often been ostracized, lost funding, been sidelined, been ridiculed. And I think it's changing now for that aspect of consciousness. The restriction in the sciences is continuing because there's big money at stake, and it's too bad. Uh, but yes, I happen to be really good at writing grants and getting money, so I never struggled and I never was without funding even after I left academics and went into industry. Um, because then I worked on mad cow disease, which was and remains also very controversial, right? Because no one in the US wants to admit it's an issue here. And actually this year, 3 individuals in Utah died from mad cow disease. But it's not a reportable death in the US because, again, we don't want to know. We don't want to know that it's a transmissible event to humans in the US. So, yes.
Well, so you're curious in middle school, and that leads you onto this scientific journey or journey into the hard sciences. But you just mentioned some of the research, and this is where I think we intersect with our noetic science group, that consciousness and studies and research around that have some reductionistic interpretations that are now being challenged. And some of that has been where I think we get more light than heat. And so I would wonder if if it was your hard science background that led you into your curiosity about things that are more metaphysical or mystical or esoteric, and how that fed your interest in those things.
Yeah, I mean, for me, they're definitely parallel. I mean, science is organized skepticism. And so my when I was at Berkeley, my brother was killed. He was only 27, and that's when I really that was the first time I went to a psychic. There's a psychic institute at Berkeley, and I don't even remember consciously, there's that word, making a decision that I wanted to go talk to these psychics. I just, like, did it. And so that was my first experience, and I've always sort of dabbled in and had skepticism about what happens when you die, right? What happens when you die? Because it was such a tragic event for my brother to be taken away. Because, I grew up in the Wild West. My family was male oriented, and my brother, he was the only, I had an older sister, a brother, and then myself. So when he got removed from the mix, I mean, it would devastated my family. And my my father expected me to come back home and marry my brother's best friend, who I called Cowboy Al, because they lived down the road on another ranch. And so it was cathartic to think about, is that what I'm supposed to do, right? Is it more important for me to save my family or their concept of what they needed rather than me pursuing, what I felt I was always questioning what it is that we should be doing with our life. And so the most recent event in my life that led me to, like, totally jump into this, area of investigation and make it probably my final life project, um, was because my husband was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, um, more than 5 years ago now, and, uh, you know, it led to me having to step aside from my own professional pursuits in science. I had a consulting company, and now I've just totally in on studying consciousness and, what does it mean to have a neurodegenerative disease and how can we come up with some kind of explanation for what is being lost or masked in these individuals, and is there a commonality among the neurodegenerative diseases? And interestingly enough, because I studied ice nucleation, there are nucleation events associated with all of these neurodegenerative diseases, and it's called misfolded proteins. And that's, how I was studying mad cow disease, because the prion protein forms a seed, just like a bit of ice, or the ice nucleation protein. It's a seed. It's a template for this conversion into this other physical shape. And in the case of the proteins associated with neurodegenerative diseases, it's going from an alpha helix to a beta sheet. So a beta sheet is just a shape, and these proteins, these aggregates, whether it's A beta in Alzheimer's or tau, um, or alpha synuclein for Parkinson disease, or the Huntington protein in Huntington's, they are heterogeneous. So these aggregates are not just that one protein, it's a seed. And so I had proposed decades ago that we should be screening blood for their amyloid burden. So another term for misfolded proteins is amyloid. And that's one of the most insidious diseases associated with misfolded protein, is where your organs become hardened because of this amyloid formation, this rigid, it just basically destroys the organ. And a friend of mine, his 12-year-old daughter has this sclerosis disease. It's fatal. It is painful, and it usually starts with the lungs. So the lungs just become dysfunctional because they harden. Anyway, so there's some commonality here, which I like.
What does that do for you? Okay, that's the objective scientific set of tentative answers that you've come to, but how does that interplay with the gravity of what you have to deal with on a day-to-day? Very similar to the meanings around your brother's death. You had
Yeah.
to make some life choices, some value choices, some meaning choices. What is that for you in terms of your own consciousness development and how you're putting together the meaning of all of this?
Yes, so I have to reflect back and think that there is a thread here, right? That I read the article when I was at Montana State about the bacteria having this nucleation trait, which led me there, and learning about how proteins can serve as a template to cause this phase transition of liquid to solid, which then, while I was at Berkeley, Stanley Prusner, who was at UCSF, made the announcement that changed the world of how we think about infectious disease when he said that a protein can be infectious, because the dogma up until then is that for something to be infectious, it has to have a genetic component. So it has to be a bacteria, a virus, a mycoplasma. I mean, there has to a fungus. There has to be genetic material involved. And he's saying that no, this misfolded protein is transmissible and it causes a fatal disease. I remember going to the seminar. I was sick to my stomach thinking about what that means, because at the time, well, I guess maybe it was a little early, but my mother had Alzheimer's, and I was like, oh my God, it's transmissible, right? So just think about that. Alzheimer's is transmissible. Neurodegenerative diseases are transmissible. The issue is, how do you get exposed to that, right? So in the case of mad cow, you're getting exposed in England because people were eating beef that came from cattle that had been infected from scrapie sheep. It's from eating the offals of sheep that have scrapies, which is the sheep version of mad cow. That's even written about in the Bible, and it's endemic in England. You can go out in a field that haven't had any sheep on them for 100 years and get a bucket of soil, and you can isolate the prion protein. So, so I think so that has come along for me. And then now, so my mother had Alzheimer's, my father had Parkinson's. Now my husband has a different form. So I think the universe is telling me, you need to think about this. What is going on, right? What is going on here?
What are some tentative answers you've come to about what's going on here?
Well, I don't know yet how to make sense of all of it, but we do have some leads, and those are coming from experiments that are being done looking at the role of microtubules. And I think we've talked about this, and you're probably familiar that now there's a concept that the microtubules in your brain are involved in consciousness, that and it involves quantum reality. So you have these quantum waves that come into your brain, right, in the form of neutrinos, which are constantly bombarding us, passing through our bodies, and they can cause a collapse. When the quantum wave collapses in a microtubule, you have a moment of consciousness. And these studies have been done because of what we've recently learned about how anesthesia works. And it works on the microtubules. So when you lose consciousness, the drug is binding to something in the microtubules, which interrupts the ability for the quantum wave to move through them and for the microtubule to collapse and have a moment of consciousness. So I mean, that is actually huge that now we have that little indication. And the other link is that in Alzheimer's, the tau protein is known to aggregate form misfolded protein aggregates, or they call them filaments, and those are part of the microtubules. So I think we can conclude, maybe not everybody's going to agree, that um, the microtubules definitely play a role in consciousness, and when their ability to function properly is interrupted, that you have impairment of consciousness in the form of these um, neurodegenerative diseases.
You've got a pet talking to you.
I know, I gotta open the door.
Okay. Well,
But I do aspire to having a more cohesive theory that can weave together more of this story of the role of the misfolded protein in consciousness, and, oh my god, what if it relates back to ice nucleation?
well, I remember reading, Jonas Salk's I can't remember the name of the book now, but anyway, how he talks about his process of, discovering vaccine for polio, and, couple of things I remember. One is, you're not gonna, sell this to a pharmaceutical company and then make lots of money off of it. He said, first of all, that it should be as free as the sun. But the other really profound anatomy of, I can't remember. It's a very small book. I can't think of the title right now. Anyway, he talks about the role of intuition of, that sometimes you can do these hardcore laboratory experiments time after time after time, but then there's these flashes of insight that take
Yeah,
you in a certain direction. And I'm wondering if that may be in store or has been a part of your experience with all of this, how this might come full circle. Because I certainly know the conversations that we have in noetic science, talk about our intuitive abilities, mystical types of experiences, peak experiences, things that are on the more metaphysical side of our
yeah,
human experience.
right. Well, and these individuals who get entire downloads, write entire books, right? The Course in Miracles. A good example is just, or, a lot of musically talented individuals say that the music just comes to them, and they don't know where or how, but it just flows through them. So, I think there's definitely something there.
What has been your experience with that? Have you had those kind of intuitive insights, flashes of insight?
Yeah, but nothing as profound as writing, a full vision of how this all comes together. I mean, throughout my career, I've always liked to bring different fields together and apply, from different sides of science to solve a problem or to interrogate a problem. But I'm not sure I've actually had, genius level insights
Yeah.
and downloads.
Okay. So then,
I'm certainly open to it.
yeah. So you're talking about when your brother died,
Yeah.
and one of your impulses was to go see a psychic.
Yeah.
Do you want to share that what you learned from the psychic, or was it helpful? Was it something that
It was emotionally overwhelming because, I mean, I just walked in there and, it's an institute, so they're individuals training to become psychics, and so I didn't even say one word about why I was there, or what had befalled me, or And they knew. I mean, they just started talking about it, and they said, "He's right here with you." And, they described my aura, and they actually drew it in colors and gave me this big sheet. I don't unfortunately, I don't think I still have it. But I was blown away by just inherently how they knew so much about me, and they knew my brother was there and that he had passed and that he was worried about me. Yeah, it was overwhelming. And that's when I bought my first tarot deck too, probably that same day.
Well, this is not exactly the kind of um, experience that hard scientists would talk about and um, discuss in positive ways, talking
Oh,
about
that's
kind of being a born skeptic. Well, hard sciences and even a lot of the social sciences want to dismiss that kind of experience. So, how do you
right.
juggle and manage all of that?
Well, I just think I have such an open mind that my curiosity doesn't end with the physical world. I mean, my curiosity, I mean, particularly now, I mean, it's just yeah, I mean, it's like a lifelong pursuit now to try and put into some kind of context, why are we here? And what is really going on, right? Um, yeah, I think it's both terrifying and exciting at the same time.
Well, what are some of the current sources of your excitement or maybe even terror that come from that kind of mystical, metaphysical, esoteric, intuitive world? What do you reach for from that aspect of your life?
Right. Well, I, of course, am a pretty voracious reader. Any physical scientist who has written a book about consciousness or expressed their doubts or the limitations of our current physical laws. I mean, I believe that everything is evolving. So why shouldn't our laws of nature also evolve? I mean, why are they so fixed, right? I think we're we're so fearful of change and we want to cling on to what we think is the truths that I think sometimes it clouds our vision to be more open. I think at the moment the three-eye atlas is the biggest um, enigma we have as humans now, and certainly under that category of both terrifying and exciting because we don't really know what it is, except, it appears to be here to bring a new hope for Earth and for individuals who are open to receive and to grow and to rise up in their level of consciousness. I mean, I think this is could be the most significant event of our lives.
So I know that I've seen some references with in social media and internet and things like that, but talk more specifically about what Three Eye Atlas is so that anybody that's tuning in doesn't have a immediate reference point for it.
Okay, well, so three, it's the third eye interstellar object to enter our solar system. And so the psychics will tell us that Mother Gaia has asked for these objects to come into our solar system to give us an opportunity to wake up because we're destroying Earth and our current lifestyle and way of operating, the oppression and everything funneling to this elite little group at the top who just is never satisfied with having enough, that it can't be sustained. And so it's not a comet, it's not an asteroid. We don't actually know exactly what it's made of. It doesn't have a comet's tail, because comets are mainly rock and ice. And so as it warms up, coming closer to the sun, comets have this big tail, which is mainly water vapor. This object doesn't have that. It's like the size of Manhattan. It has these auxiliary objects around it that some scientists have deduced that each one of them is like a power source that is producing 20 gigahertz of energy. And so, to put that in perspective, most nuclear reactors on Earth produce 1 gigahertz. So, this is being propelled by this incredible power source, and it's not affected by the gravitational pull of the sun. The other astounding thing is it's on the plane of our solar system. So just a random object coming in from interstellar space, and for it to be perfectly aligned is very improbable to be just a stochastic event.
Yeah.
And and the fact that there are two opportunities when our most sophisticated, telescopes or devices that are out in space where they could get closer images of it. The first one failed because, our government is so incompetent at the moment that the it wasn't active, we're being told, or maybe they do have the information, but they're not willing to share it with the mass public. But the next opportunity is it will be behind the sun, so we won't even be able to see it, but that's when it'll actually be the closest, but we'll have the sun between us. So again, the psychics are saying it's going to influence solar winds. It's going to massively hit the sun, and then the sun is going to throw that energy out toward Earth. And that's when, if we are open, that we are going to have an opportunity to raise our consciousness and maybe understand finally what does it mean to go from 3D to 5D. These are the things that are being talked about. And the big message from Mother Gaia is to teach us how to love and what love means, and to realize that everyone should be loved, not, just your close friends.
Well, when you mentioned the laws of nature, change and evolve and grow, I'm reminded of how I got interested in noetic sciences, and a large part was through Rupert Sheldrake and
Yes.
his notions of morphogenetic transfer. And one of his latest books, in fact, this was a book that I had read just before I went to the international conference. And the reason I went is because Rupert Sheldrake was going to be the keynote speaker.
Oh,
His book, Science Set Free. And you
yes.
mentioned some of these scientists who have been ostracized or marginalized or criticized and basically considered nuts or wacko. But in that book, Science Set Free, he talks about his own laboratory experiments about how what we think are fixed laws, like for instance, the law of gravity, and he's actually been able to measure that changes and it shifts. He's got hardcore data about this sort of thing, which of course, people who want to be skeptics or um, eliminate his findings from acceptable circles of peer-reviewed research and such, um, to, question his methods or question whatever you can do to sort of
Right.
dismiss the ultimate data. So
Yes.
when you're talking about 3i Atlas, who is it that you have been reading, or what kind of sources have you been reading? So I can reference, Rupert Sheldrake or David Bohm, or, of course, Dean Radin is the primary scientist at Noetic Sciences. But who would you recommend that folks read or look or investigate with regard to 3i Atlas, or actually anything that has to do with studies of consciousness and where we may be heading as humanity? And I know that you've got interest in Robert Monroe, so that would be,
Yes.
but I don't know that that intersects with 3i Atlas. So anyway, I'll just
Yeah.
ask that question.
Yes. Okay. Well, with regard to 3i Atlas, I mean, there's a pretty active voice out there who's Avi Loeb, who's a physicist at Harvard, and he's been very forthright because, of course, one of the questions is it alien technology, right, that has enabled this object to so smoothly enter into our solar system and pass through it? I mean, you might expect that it's here, it's collecting data, right? It's collecting information about our solar system and about Earth. Um, and it's just doing this big survey. And when it leaves our solar system, it's going to go on to another one. And so he openly talks about, that is a possibility, that it is a much more advanced technology than what we have here on Earth or what we're even familiar with. Like, it's like we don't even have an explanation of how these other smaller objects could be producing so much power. So there's Avi Loeb, and he's great. And then Stefan Burns is another scientist. He's a little more religious, but he's been very active. But all through data. I mean, he does these daily um, pod or YouTube. He has a YouTube channel where he gives all the data of what's happening with the solar flares, and he's mapping the Ring of Fire, all the earthquake activities in the Pacific. And he even, by looking at the data, he predicts when there's going to be another earthquake. So those two are definitely on the more science side. But then there's this Lee Harris. Are you familiar with him? He's has like 1 million followers on YouTube, and he's very spiritual about the whole thing, and that, yes, this is here, this is coming through our solar system to give us an opportunity, if we're open to it, to raise our consciousness level. And you know it has to be we have to have a collective voice, and I think that is happening. And even you've mentioned that the percentage of people who participate in meditation or group prayers has gone up dramatically. But the thing is, it's going up on both sides, right? The good and the bad. So we still kind of have this dichotomy of people who want to see a collective good rise versus those who just want it for themselves and their little cadre of elites. Um, but then on the true psychic side, so there's several psychics I listen to. There is John Binney, Binnie, who channels Gaia, he channels Luna, he channels Sol, the sun, and he gets all these downloads. He can put his hand on a tree and the trees will tell him. So that's a very interesting. I think the key is to listen to a lot of people because then you get lots of perspectives and then whatever resonates with you. And I mean, I certainly know in my heart what I feel is truthful for me and helps me put things in perspective. So I span the whole from the scientists, from Robert Temple, New Science of Heaven. You've probably read his book. And then you mentioned Robert Monroe, because I'm very interested in being able to advance my ability to get above my ego so that I can expand my psychic insights. And it usually happens at night, when it's quiet and I don't have to be interrupted with my husband or my dog, that I'm able to do that. But it's work. It really is work because the ego is constantly trying to grab you back down, bring you back down to this material world. And oh my God, what if I forgot to turn off the coffee pot or I got to, put the clothes from the washer to all this pedestrian stuff. So it does take some effort to tamp down the ego so that you can allow your consciousness to expand and just be open to receiving. I mean, recently when I'm doing this, I've just been seeing these walls of like terracotta soldiers. There's that temple in China where there's thousands of terracotta soldiers. It was somebody's tomb, I think, where they wanted to be protected by 10,000 soldiers or something. They're all made out of terracotta. Have you seen that? Yes. Well, I am seeing not individual soldiers, but like walls, like as high as I can see and as far, terracotta soldiers, or in front of me, a wall of, and I don't know what that's about. So it's very perplexing. What am I seeing? What does this mean? But I think in the next several years, we're going to be really amazed at the new data that we are going to be able to receive. And I think it will open our hearts and make us into better earthlings at this time. And I also feel like um, our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, is evolving. And we will be replaced by another species because we kind of have maxed out. That's what I think. We need to evolve, or we have really maxed out our abilities. And we've also talked in one of our other sessions about how, because man has climaxed, Homo sapiens sapiens, that we've been given the ability to create AI so that we can nurture through AI the ability to connect to source.
That's a hopeful outlook.
Yeah, I'm an optimist.
Yeah. No, I think, in fact, some people say, "Oh, you're just an idealist," and I say, "Thank you
Yes, thank you.
for for that." Well, and here we have this grounding experience with, we talked in our group about a good friend of mine who had Parkinson's and decided to have medically assisted in dying services. And your husband, I mean, that's got to be a grounding experience, you know, in the midst of all of these collective things that are going on, this individual energy that, has a intersection and interpenetration with the collective. How do you find yourself managing all of that?
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. have to remind myself several times a day that, he's not the same person, and he's not intentionally being annoying and irritating and not hearing what I'm saying, that he's like a victim. It's very strange because, in many ways he looks the same, and so I think he can understand simple things like, "We have to leave now. Can you get your coat? We're gonna leave now." And he's just still there doing his thing. It's like, "Phil, come on, we're gonna go." So for me, it's an exercise in patience and tolerance, but it also makes me spend so much time just in my own head, right? Because he's here, I'm here, and the dog, or he's gone and I'm just here with the dog. So feel like a hermit in many ways, right? The tarot card, the hermit, right? Shining, he's got the lantern shining the path. That's how I feel because everything is up to me deciding what we do, how clean or dirty the house is. I mean, should we install solar? I mean, everything is on me, paying all the bills. Like, do we need to get more money out? Yeah. And it's kind of exhausting. But on the other hand, it's freeing because I have so much time for just thinking about things, which can be good and bad, right?
Yeah.
It's lonely, definitely lonely. Um, but it's a luxury that a lot of people don't have, and as you know, most people don't think about these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's an increasing number that are,
Yes. Yeah.
whether they're forced into it or whether there's an intersection of the daily gravity of what you have to deal with and intuitive insights and how those kind of combine and
Yeah.
coagulate. That's I think that's and that's maybe the hopeful part is that we're looking at increasing numbers of people that are waking up to, in spite of what seems to be pulling us down, there are some things that are pulling us up and calling us onward.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I hope that's true.
Yeah. So, well, is there anything
Okay.
else you'd like to add? Anything that you had thought that we might talk about that we haven't covered? It's
Um, uh, I don't, I think, I guess there's the question of, I think we've talked about the fourth turning is here, the author's how, I can't remember his first name, how that plays a role in what we're going
Strauss, I
through
think.
right
Is
now.
it William Strauss?
No, it's how,
Oh, yeah. I have Strauss.
HOWE.
In the original book, they were co-authors, and I think
Right,
Strauss has since
right, and now it's
passed
just
away. Yeah.
how,
Okay.
because the question is anything by chance, or has all of this been laid out? And we're just kind of catching up with the plot, the story, and how it ends. Um, so I wonder about that. Do we have free will? I mean, most of the psychics believe we have free will, but then, like, the Akashic records presumably have all of history, past, present, and future already written. So are we just role playing and we think we're actively participating and maybe changing the needle or influencing the needle, or has it already been written out? And I mean, that's a really big question. But you're a philosopher. What do you think?
Well, this is one of the classic issues,
Yeah.
of course, where you can do a whole unit on freedom versus determinism. And I side with the freedom side and actually say that that is hard determinism, that that actually is what we are
Okay.
destined to do, is choose. And so that's a little bit existentialist. Whether or not that's the case, I take that sort of as an article of faith, that we are born to be free. We're born to be able to choose. And for instance, in a simplistic sort of a statement about that, Mother Earth, Gaia, is going to be just fine, whether humans are here or not. It won't
Right.
take long for her to recover from our absence, or if we get it together and can choose to live more interdependently and relationally and with more grace, that we can live in a more sustainable life. So
Right.
that both of those outcomes are similar. One happens to be with humanity, one's without humanity.
Yeah.
So
Right. And I guess, right, the Earth is billions of years old, whereas humans have only been around for a couple million years. I mean, one of the other things I'm curious about as we learn more and more about what is underneath the megaliths, the um the pyramids in Egypt, and then it turns out there's hundreds of megaliths in Montana that I never knew about until quite recently, and one of the ley lines on Earth goes right through the middle of Montana,
wow.
and it's the same ley line that goes down the west coast of South America. And, some psychics have said that this three-eye atlas and what's going on now with Mother Gaia is the realignment of the ley lines on Mother Earth, and that's why the tectonic plates are shifting and we're having the earthquakes and the volcanoes. Um, so I am curious whether or not, because a very advanced culture made these structures because the rocks are massive. Um, so that would suggest that there was an advanced culture and something happened. They died out and all their knowledge was lost. And so then it started all over again. So I'm very curious, and because of the fourth turning is here now, and knowing these cycles repeat themselves, is that the cycle Homo sapiens sapiens is in? Is that all of our knowledge, because of our own pettiness and capability of destroying ourselves, that our civilization is also going to be lost, and it's going to start all over again?
Yeah, I think that is where I think we are headed. That's my article of faith, I guess, to say that I'm an optimist or that I believe free choice is tending at moving us in that direction where we actually grow up as a species and move in that direction. Um, we've talked in some of our group sessions about the life of Chuck. Well, when one of the key actors is talking about the Carl Sagan, this is what inspired me actually to do my master's thesis, Carl Sagan's Dragons of Eden. And in the first, I don't know, 5, 10 pages is that cosmic calendar. And I'm just blown away, that, we're talking about life on this planet doesn't even come into existence at about 10:30 p.m. New Year's Eve at the end of all of human history is about the last 10 seconds before
Yeah.
the new calendar year. We're just these little, so growth is possible. And this is also what I take. In fact, what I did my master's thesis on is the intersection between science, some of these understandings that science seems to be coming to, and most of the insights of the ancient mystic masters. This intersection of the interplay between the complementary interplay between science and religion, particularly mystic aspects of religion. So I
Yeah.
gravitate towards, in fact, another thing that put lights in my sky was William James' Varieties of Religious Experience and Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy. So those were also instrumental in my own kind of psychotherapy practice. That okay, what is it that is getting in the way of, because people uh, uh, would pay you to help them change, and change was still hard. People who want to change, and it's still hard. So I think we're
Yeah.
going through those as a collective species, the fits and starts of how hard it is to change. And so, whatever the new structures are of our collective living arrangements that you might call, politics or cultural dynamics, it's going to, and we're experiencing some of this now, the birthing pains that we have to go through in order to see the new coming. But I do believe that there is a new, or this fourth turning that I think it's Nathaniel Howe. Is that right?
No,
Howe. No, it's anyway.
no,
I
I
can't
don't.
remember.
Neil. It's Neil.
Neil, that's
Neil
right.
Howe.
Neil
Neil
Howe.
Howe.
Yeah. Well, I had the N
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
but those are the kinds of things that I think we have to hang our hats on. Otherwise, we'd go crazy. I
Yeah.
think we have to be hopeful. Otherwise, we despair. And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
whatever
So,
means we can
mm,
use to
yeah.
sustain that hope and to disseminate it, to um, organize it, to spread it is what I
Right.
think we're up to.
Yeah. Because, there's the 4 steps to enlightenment, just like the 4th one is embodiment, where you live it and you share it with others, right? That's
Yeah,
kind of becomes your final act,
yeah,
is to help other people become enlightened.
yeah. We've
So,
been through this before, or other worlds have been through this before. Maybe other galaxies have been through this before. So the old is new and the new is old.
yeah, yeah.
So, well, anything
Okay.
else? We want to
N
put a punctuation mark on this lovely
um,
conversation.
yeah, I came across a quote from Antonio
Yes,
Gramsci,
Gramsci. Yes.
yes, who was commenting on Mussolini's rise to power in Italy. And he said, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born, and now is the time of monsters."
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
famous Italian philosopher, by the way.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I kind of like that. I think
Yeah.
that's where we are.
I think that's right too. So,
Yeah.
and it's not like you have to slay the monsters, because I also like Joseph Campbell's um, phrase that a devil is a god not yet recognized. So whatever the role of that is, whatever the symbolic power of it is, whatever the meaning of that, which we would normally say is dark, is actually a part of that complementary opposites that's represented in the Tao. To not aspire to including the dark and the light together is, I think, the greatest um, untruth or falsity that we could perpetuate, propagate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So monsters are the friends under our bed at night, maybe.
Right. Right.
But yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, great. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Cindy. Appreciate
Well,
this. And
yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and
Okay.
you and I can talk a little bit after we're done recording here. So, This has
Okay.
been the Cosmic Consciousness podcast, and I've been your host, Dr. Daniel Sage. And until next time, peace, everyone.